Welcome to On the Mark. I'm your host, Howard Mark Rubin. I am so excited to present this podcast series addressing our rapidly changing world and how it is affecting industries and people in unique and interesting ways. As John F. Kennedy once said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. The business leaders and personalities who I will be interviewing in these podcasts certainly look to the future. And I hope you come away with information and inspiration that helps you adapt in both your business and personal lives. You can find these podcasts on all major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, getsplatzer.com. Welcome to another edition of On the Mark. And today we have as a guest, Marty Dolan. Marty, who sometimes is referred to as Don Quixote because of his political quest, is a very interesting man. We're going to talk about his business achievements and his business background, but we're going to start off talking about what he's doing politically as a Republican candidate for the 14th Congressional District. So, Marty, I say you're a Don Quixote because you're running against one of the most talked about, I'm not saying but talked about politicians in the country. In fact, I think there's talk about her running for, God forbid, but talk about her running for President of the United States. And we're talking about OAC. You're running against her in her district that she's represented for at least a couple of terms now. Can you tell me what motivated you to make this run against her?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple of clarifications. I'm running as a Democrat.
Oh, you're running as a Democrat. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
our primary is on June 23rd,
Okay.
and I ran against AOC 2 years ago in 2024.
Right.
So it's a terrain that I'm very familiar with, which is this map back here and back here, which is the southern Bronx and northern Queens, and it's AOC. And my motivation for doing it is I had a great business career, and I saw what's happening to our country, and I wanted to contribute to fix it. And I think that at the core of the problem is really a definition of what it means to be American. And I think you have somebody running in the office who is profoundly un-American in her approach to trying to get things done.
I was very surprised that Mandami became the mayor and was so popular with younger people. It was amazing to me. And AOC is part of that same kind of generational, what I call leftist or socialist bent that younger people seem to have. And it seems to be a generational, not religious or ethnic or anything else. Seems to be a generational change.
Yeah.
What part of the electorate do you think that that you can attract the most in a primary in these districts, which are, I would think, for the most part, poorer districts in terms of their income and the people that live in them? And what are you going to do to try to get these people to feel that they shouldn't want someone like AOC who professes these very leftist or liberal policies? What do you intend to offer the public?
Well, I think if AOC was advocating liberal policies, I would be more inclined to support her. But she's not. She's offering very, very far left ideas, and she's going about it in a very antagonistic way. So when I said un-American, well, the core of America is that when Alexander Hamilton and James Madison put together this beautiful Constitution that we have, and the Constitution is a role model now for, we have 51 assemblies. We have the National Congress, and then we have the state assemblies, and then they have school districts, and we have counties, and we have villages, is that you have to win from the center in America. Madison and Hamilton made it so that the majority could not dominate the minority, but the minority could not dominate the majority. That's why we have 6-year Senate terms. And so that's why radicalism just never works in a legislature. And so you take the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., fantastic, leader. He wouldn't have been a good legislator. Or Muhammad Ali wouldn't have been a good legislator, but they were great leaders. And so what you have is you have somebody who is in the wrong job with AOC, which is that she's trying to, push through something that, let's say, 15 or 20% of the people want in a legislature, which is designed to find the 55 to 60% middle ground. Okay, so that's question number one. Question number two is, because of that, she has alienated many different parts of the community in the Bronx and Queens. So there's two communities in particular that she's alienated. So the first one is the African American community. Now, you might think I'm not a natural candidate to lead issues for the African American community, but when you take the word black and then you take the word brown and you say it's black and brown, and then you say black, brown, and Hamas, well, you lose the black people. They're like, what is supporting Hamas have to do with the fact that in the South Bronx, the average family income is $35,000 a year? They're totally unrelated, except that when you're focusing on Hamas and Palestine and the struggles there, you're not focusing on the issues in your district. So that's number one. And number two, in Queens, everybody calls Queens the world's borough. And when we had the 200,000 illegal immigrants come into New York City, many of them ended up on Roosevelt Avenue, where the representative there was advocating for shoplifting. I'm kind of...
Actually, I grew up in that area. I come from Elmhurst. I grew up right off of Roosevelt Avenue, so I
Yeah,
know the area and it's very well.
Yeah, so under the 7 train, you had the representative from the district who was advocating for shoplifting. She was saying that they can take stuff from the stores, and then all the store owners were getting bled dry. Things descended into chaos. The next thing you know, you had 2 cops who were shot. They were shot point blank. And so we formed a group called Restore Roosevelt Avenue, which is still going. It was a bipartisan group. And we begged Kathy Hochul to send in the state troopers, which she did. So you have a representative where, of all the 435 representatives in Congress, the local people are begging the governor to send in the state troopers. So I think there's a lot of discontent in the district about what AOC has actually done. I think in the African American community, there's a sense that their interests, which go back to slavery and the evils of slavery, have been completely lost in the shuffle of Hamas in Palestine and riots at Columbia University and what you're seeing now out in Brooklyn, and families terrorized, normal families terrorized on our streets. And then an attitude where your congressman doesn't care about your business, doesn't care that there are prostitutes outside of the local school. This is a bad congressman. So that's the case that we're going to make. But it's not only that case, because we have great policies too. We have fantastic policies. We're trying to get at what exactly can we do to help what I call the bottom third, the people in our society who are really struggling to advance.
So let me ask you your feeling about a big political issue that is talked about every day now around the country, called gerrymandering. What they're doing with congressional districts to make them either more Republican or more Democrat. Do you think that's a good thing for either side to be doing?
Okay, so with respect to gerrymandering, it's profoundly un-American. It's about the far left and the far right. It's going to end badly. It's a terrible look, and we're at war with each of the parties instead of working from the middle to try to create policies that are good for America. So
Well,
I think it's a very bad look. I was actually part of the debate on districts in the 2023 timeframe because you had the Independent Redistricting Commission in New York, and they're trying to find the right way to set up the districts. And it was full of games. It's always been full of games. But the way it looks right now is you're gonna basically, the Republicans are gonna try to do in the Midwest effectively what the Democrats have done in New England, which is, New England is entirely blue, even though New England is probably 42 to 40% Republican.
so we have it seems to me that I agree with you. The country is very split, and there's really very little middle. The middle is disappearing. I call it the disappearing
You're looking at the
of
middle.
the moderate.
You're looking at
Yeah,
the
well,
middle
that's
right here.
unfortunately there's not a lot of us. I mean, I've been called a rhino in the past, a Republican in name only, because I'm not really a fan of Donald Trump, but I'm a fan of a lot of conservative policies.
Yeah.
And I think that's becoming rarer and rarer. And it seems that what's happening in this country is the only way you can win a primary is to go to your extreme. The left goes further left and the right goes further right, because those are the people that vote in the primaries. And then after the primaries, these candidates have to figure out that went to their extremes. How do they get back in the middle? Because they need that for the general election. So it seems that there's a place, and there should be a place for independents to kind of, fill that void. Because I'm not sure if the electorate, uh, whether they vote or not, is as extreme to the left or the right as their political leaders, or at least the positions that these political leaders are taking. How do you feel about that?
Independent parties have never worked. I ran as an independent last year for public advocate, and when you look at it, I mean, people go into the voting booth in November, and they just vote straight down the line. Former Governor Cuomo was a notable exception for that. I think what you need though is you need the donors to wake up, because what happens with a primary is a primary is not that expensive to run if you're a major donor. Like, for example, in my district, it's not a rich district. It's not like Beverly Hills. It's not like you got to have, $20 million to run the campaign. AOC got 20,000 votes.
Right.
The only thing keeping her in Congress is somebody coming along with $1 million, and people don't do it. And so I think the more, and you have a lot of griping from the donors about, what's going on in politics. Ken Griffin hasn't donated to my campaign. It'd be logical if he did. Bill Ackman hasn't donated to my campaign. He was donating to Eric Adams' campaign after Eric had already been wiped out. So I think the donors need to think harder about their investments, to be honest, because running a primary is not that expensive. But the way a primary actually works is, AOC's case, you go rent 100 Uber vans and you bring people to the polls. And that's how it's done. It's 10,000 t-shirts, it's 50,000 leaflets, it's 400 wardens and a fleet of Ubers. It's got nothing to do with the politics. It's just got to do with money. And so the donors sit there and say, well, I don't know. Like, well, if you don't know, you're going to get the same results. I don't think, though, an independent party, you can have independent voters. I can understand that, because there's a lot of times I'd rather vote for a Republican or a Democrat. I'm not too wedded to the parties, but I think independent parties have never worked.
How do you incorporate social media into a campaign? It seems to me these days, television ads, newspapers, things that traditionally were used in campaigning and in reaching people for commercial reasons too. are being supplanted by the use of social media. And it seems to me that a smart campaign, and I think I have to give Mandami credit for this, he had a tremendous social media presence. Do you think that that's necessary these days to reach the audience? That's how you reach the voter, through social media?
I think you have to look at every race differently. So, for example, for a city council race, you have to be in the district. It's a matter of law. You have to be in the district, and the people in the district, they're so concentrated that you have to have really done stuff in the district. That's what they want in a city council race. State assembly, pretty much the same thing. State senate. Now you get to Congress. It's a little differently because you know somebody in the Bronx is going to rely on my judgment about China and Taiwan. Well, I know a lot about China and Taiwan, and that's not their sweet spot. I think in the case of a primary, each district is different. Where the unfortunately, what I'm going to say won't make the donors like the social media. I don't think it matters that much to some voters. So if you go up to Castle Hill next time you're driving up the Bruckner Expressway and you look to the right and you see nothing but a wall of NYCHA apartment buildings, those people are not watching social media. They're looking at who's turning up at their door, who's turning up at their church, who's there. Now, the one thing that is good about social media, I think, is that it really forces you to sharpen your message. So if you take Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles, I think is fantastic. You had the New York mayor's race over here. Now you have the Los Angeles mayor's race over here. Spencer Pratt's message in Spanish is Spencer, saca la basura, which is Spencer, take out the trash. I mean, that's a very sharp message. And people are like, I get it. Like, that's what has to happen is we have to take out the trash. It's like going to a good comedy club. It just hits. And that's the one good thing about social media. So it helps a candidate sharpen his message. So I'm on social media every day having little discussions with people, and it's definitely helped me sharpen my message. But I don't think it makes any difference in the South Bronx. I think it's like what you need in the South Bronx is $500,000 to give out T-shirts and go see the people.
Well, I would think that it seems that the voters, most commentators say this, voters don't vote on foreign policy issues, on anything but their pocketbook. I mean, that becomes the issue. When gas prices are up, some parties to blame, people in power are to blame. When things are less affordable, when inflation is up, that becomes the issue. Those are the things that people vote for, and I would think that's even more true in a district that has less wealth, like the one that you're running in.
Well, the
What do
economy, and the
you?
great thing about the economy in the South Bronx is it's always the same. It's always
Well,
bad. So I think it's very hard. I lived in Manhattan. I lived in Brooklyn. It's very hard, I think, for people who haven't been in the Bronx and been in Queens to really understand like how poor the economy is in the South Bronx. It's $35,000 a year of median household income. Household income. That's two people or mom and dad and kids. I think the way voters generally work is they vote for somebody who they like or somebody who they somehow kind of connect to. I think that's the primary way they do it. If you look at Co-op City, for example, there's a great representative, George Latimer, who defeated Jamal Bowman. He beat him in Westchester 70-30, and he lost in Co-op City 70-30. People voted along racial lines. They voted along who they identified with. It could have been anybody, honestly. And I think that's the challenge that I have to overcome in the South Bronx. Now, one of the good things behind for me is that I'm backed actually by the hip hop community. And the reason I'm backed by the hip hop community is because I want to privatize all of NYCHA in the South Bronx. Because I think until you take some dramatic step to change the culture the social culture, the political culture, the economic culture of public housing and how it impacts a neighborhood, nothing's going to change. You're always going to have the situation that you have.
I have a different view of why the Bronx is in the sad state it's in. I think two things have happened that has put the Bronx in that situation. One, the first one was Co-op City. Co-op City, at when it was first built, was a tremendous exodus of the white people living all over the Bronx. They moved to Co-op City, so the racial balance was changed, and the white people were in Co-op City, and the population of Black and Hispanics were in the rest of the borough because it was such a huge project. And then the other thing that I think is a problem in the communities is the way that they house people. These large public projects become ghettos. They become gang infested. They become uh, very unsafe for people to live in. Instead of having things that are more spread out, these large, almost cities themselves, I think, are a magnet for crime and drugs, and I think it's been a disservice to a lot of the people that live in it. And I think that the government has to rethink how they house people, because I think those two events have led to the Bronx, which at one time was a very good place to live, a nice place to live. The Grand Concourse was fashioned after the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and it was a beautiful area. I think unless we reevaluate how we house people, and these big housing projects, whether it would be Co-op City, which I think was destructive to the Bronx, or these large projects, until we do that, I don't think we're going to make
Well, Howard,
these people live any better.
you're talking exactly about my platform, which is I don't think the government should be housing people. I think I would go further than you're going, which is when you go up to these, let's call it the projects, you're in the South Bronx and you cross the street, literally across the street, and you find someone who owns their home and you get their signature on a petition and you ask them what apartment they're in. They stand up and they say, "That's my home. I own that home. I don't own it. I'm not an apartment. I'm not a renter." So my proposal is to give those apartments away to the current tenants at half price, okay, and to deregulate housing. Because I don't think when you're the problem people have with politics is they want their politician to be an inspirational leader. That's not what politicians should be. That's your preacher or that's your dad or your uncle. They want politicians to be an apartment manager. I don't think politicians should be apartment managers at all. I think we can finance apartments. I think that's one thing. But my proposal is to give away $150,000 apartments at half price with a mortgage for that to all of the public housing projects. Now there's 177,000 apartments. So you probably only do 10,000 a year so that you get the program running. But I completely agree with you that if you're doing anything else, it's just not going to work. It's not going to change the game. And what you need is a game-changing solution where you create an equity ownership culture. That's what they did in Singapore. So in Singapore, what they did is they said, you have to save money and you have to own your apartment because then we're going to build out of the poorest nation in Asia, we're going to create one of the richest nations in Asia by having a change in the culture. And that's exactly what I'm running on. Whereas what AOC does is she says, I'm going to put in a basketball court. And it's completely ineffective. But, she runs around saying, I put a basketball in the Astoria houses. I live next to the Astoria houses. They had 2 basketball courts. You're like, they don't need basketball courts. They need mortgages. So my complaint about the far left is that they're not getting into policy. They like protests. They like to run around and talk about no kings and talk about Trump and talk about this, that, but they have no specific policies that are going to change anything.
And your policies that you think would change things, you think What policies do you advocate that would improve people's lives that are realistic and has the possibility of
I'm going to
actually
give you
coming?
5, and I'm going to call them
Okay.
Marty Money. We're going out
Okay.
with dollar bills with these policies. So the first one is, if you have an apartment in NYCHA, I'm going to give it to you at half price
Mhm.
with a mortgage. So that's $75,000 of equity that I'm giving you. Okay, that's a game changer. If you're a young person, I don't want you paying any income taxes until you're 25, because you earn money like this in your life and you're taxed like this. So what happens is the young people are always behind. So the way it would actually work is that $60 that gets taken out of your paycheck at McDonald's, I want to put that in another account and give it back to you when you're 26. I want it to accumulate like an IRA, because I want an income mentality with our young people, not a dependency mentality. Okay.
Okay.
Policy 3, I want parents to get a rebates on their kids' taxes. So if you have 3 kids who are paying taxes, I want you to get a rebate on their taxes. Why? Because you created those taxpayers. You sat at the kitchen table with them when they were 12 years old or 13 years old, and you created the culture. And I want to create a family culture, not a government culture. Number 4, if you live within 1,000 feet of a federal highway, I want you to get congestion relief. I want you to get $1,500 a year. We're going to do congestion pricing on all the federal highways in the Bronx and Queens, because you've got truck drivers. You have 80 million people coming through the Bronx every year, and only 1.5 million people live there. So we're going to tax the people coming through the Bronx, and that money is going to go into the community as rebates. And lastly, if you're a income earning mom and you have a newborn, I'm going to give you $7,500 off your taxes for the first 5 years.
How about the policy that some people advocate of restitution for slavery, giving Black Americans who have ancestors that were slaves and giving them some money um, for compensation, I suppose. What do you think of that concept?
This is the classic example of the difference between me and AOC, which is she talks about how the Black people are behind her. I'm behind that idea. I'm fully supportive of the idea. You're a lawyer, so you understand the concept of damages. Damages are, a central part of our legal framework. And you have a lot of the southern states that are bragging about their low tax rates. Their economies were built with free labor. So we have a House commission on reparations. We have a New York State commission on reparations. And AOC goes to Columbia University to lobby for Hamas. Well, this is like the in the Black community, they're like, what are you doing? What about us? We are your constituents, not them. So and I've studied some pretty complicated financial problems. I've studied the pollution of the environment for 30 years and who pays for that. I've, the rebuilding of the World Trade Center and who pays for that, the global financial crisis and who pays for that. It will be complicated, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And it doesn't mean that there isn't an answer. And I don't know what the number is, but instead of having 1,000 different programs that are trying to compensate for what went wrong during the slavery era, we should just come to a number. And then those programs can be reduced. And what the far left is saying about this issue is, we're going to protest. We're going to get a Democratic president for the next 30 years, and then we're going to change the Supreme Court, and then we'll have DEI again. Well, that's just stupid. That's not an answer. Because the Supreme Court has now, DEI is off the table, gerrymandering is off the table. The simple solution is what works, which is, we know from the United States legal system, this concept of damages works. We have a household commission a House of Representatives commission, and we have a New York State commission. We should put energy behind those. I don't know what their answer would be, but I would be in favor of looking at that issue very closely. And that's one of the reasons that the Black community in the Bronx is supporting me, because that's what I'm saying, which is you should go get your money.
Okay, let's talk a little about your background, how you came to politics. I know you've run a couple of times. What's your business background?
I called myself a business doctor. I was a business doctor at an investment bank, and I was in the insurance sector. And if you know anything about the world's financial business, everything ends up in the insurance sector when it goes wrong. So, for example, President Nixon created the Environmental Protection Administration, and he put William Ruckelshaus in charge of the EPA, and they came up with this theory of liability. And the next thing you know, there was a $200 billion bill to clean up the environment. That ended up in the insurance business all over the world. It ended up in Munich, Zurich, London, and I helped figure out how to pay for that. So that was not a small task, and I didn't figure it out. I worked with 500 very talented people to help figure it out. Lawyers, accountants, regulators. Then you had something called Lloyd's of London blow up. I helped figure that out. Then the planes went into the World Trade Center. The planes going into the World Trade Center, rest in peace, the lost souls, and our condolences to the families. Most insurance contracts expire on December 31st, and it was September 11th. So we had about 100 days to create a whole new industry, because otherwise you couldn't go in a tall building or you couldn't fly in an airplane. I mean, this was a pretty difficult time. But again, we rolled up our sleeves and we got it done. And then you had the big one, which was the global financial crisis, when it turns out that you had 5 or 6 companies called the financial guarantors. There were MBIA and AMBAC and companies you never heard of. They were guaranteeing all the mortgages in the United States. So that brings me to our $50 trillion deficit. Now we have $50 trillion deficit. And you have people in Congress who are kind of barely out of college or barely out of high school. They don't have experience dealing with such, this is a big problem. You can't have $50 trillion of debt, because at some point now the interest on the debt becomes as big as the social services budget. It becomes as big as the defense budget. So I think you need people who can solve very complicated problems. My personal role model in 1977 was a guy named Felix Rohatyn. So if you're a New Yorker, when New York City went bankrupt back in the late 70s, Felix Rohatyn came in from Lazard, and he worked with Governor Carey to figure it out. And that's one of the reasons I became an investment banker, because I thought, I want to do what that guy does. And that's where we are now, which is we have $50 trillion of debt. We have 15,000 nuclear weapons, and we're trying to raise up the bottom third of our society. It's going to take, this is heavy lifting. It's not going to work by giving people free buses. It's not going to do it. So you need that. That's where I think you need people. There isn't a single person in Congress with my background. I made the joke for the city council. There isn't a single person in the city council who's worked on Wall Street. Wall Street pays 20% of New York's taxes. It just doesn't make any sense.
And what do you think of the of Mayor Mandami's policies of that he's advocating? Do you think that that's going to be good for New York City, or do you think it's going to cause an exodus out of New York City? How do you feel about that?
I posted today on social media that, it used to be that there was this many people coming into New York and this many people moving to Miami. And in the last 5 years, it's been like that. So I think Mandami has his gifts. He has a gift of communication to the people, but he's learning what I talked about earlier, which is there are 5 people who run New York. There's President Trump, who gives a third of the money to New York City and New York State. There's Governor Hochul. There's Andrew Stewart Cousins. There's Julie Menon, who's a fantastic city council leader. She was the community board leader when the World Trade Center went down, and she had to figure out how to, rebuild the World Trade Center. And then there's Zoran Mandami. So he's basically tossed away a lot of his political capital in the first 4 months. And these three impressive women, the wise ladies of New York, I call them, Hochul, Menon, and Andrea Stewart Cousins, they kind of pushed him to the side and said, we'll figure this out. You go play soccer in the street. You go do what you're going to do, because you're not helping us solve this problem. He was making it worse. He was making it worse because he's throwing snowballs at Ken Griffin. He's advocating for anti-Semitic riots. And he's basically undermining what I would call the civic culture of New York City. So I think Hochul and Menon, especially, have really got Mandami in a box now. And I think he's just going to be kicking soccer balls around, trying to be popular. I don't think he's going to be able to get anything done. I will repeat. If you have half the kids in New York City schools cannot read, write, or do math at grade level. Half the kids in our school. Now you have school budget is $45 billion. And I've never seen Mandami, who goes for these walks up and down Manhattan, and he stops at the cafes and he stops here and there. He's never once stopped at a school and said, here's what I'm going to do to fix the schools. That's what a mayor's supposed to do.
What do you think of
I think
why are charter
he's
schools?
a very ineffective politician because he has a marvelous opportunity and he's completely wasting it.
Why are charter schools more effective than the public school system? And should we be expanding the charter school programs?
We should definitely be expanding the charter schools programs. We should be allowing religious schools to expand. We should be allowing, what we should do is have direct election of the school chancellor. And the people who should vote are parents of children in school. Because that would make the mayor's job easier. He could just mayor, he could handle the police force and so forth. And then if you went to the parents and said, who should be your school chancellor? Well, then maybe you'd get more accountability in the schools. So you have half the kids can't read, write, or do math at grade level, and you have Randy Weingarten and Zoran basically taking votes from the teachers and dollars from the pension funds. And here's the problem. Now, if you can't read, write, or do math 100 years ago, that's all right. You go work in the lumber yard. You go work in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. You do a job with your hands. That's not where we're going. We're going to AI and technology. So what you do is you create a permanent affordability crisis. You're running a machine where you're basically spitting out 50 to 60,000 people a year who are never going to earn anything except for minimum wage. What they're going to do, they're going to get bicycles and they're going to deliver hamburgers to kids working at Google and JP Morgan who went to better schools. And the solution is, we're going to give you free potatoes. And it's like, why don't you just fix the schools?
Well,
Like,
I think AI.
why is saving 30 cents on a potato the right answer for taking a 22-year-old who got a bad education? Fix the schools and shut up about Israel and shut up about Venezuela and shut up. I don't care what you think about it. I do care that if you're creating an assembly line of people who can't afford to live in New York because they're not educated.
Well, let's talk about AI. You mentioned AI a minute ago, and my feeling about that is there's a risk that other than Uber delivery people or people that are very technologically necessary and trained, we're going to have a huge unemployment problem because AI is going to make it. AI and robotics are going to make it that we don't need as many people doing as many tasks. Do you see that becoming a problem, and how would you approach the problem of AI decreasing the amount of jobs that are necessary or changing significantly the type of jobs that are going to be necessary?
So last year I ran for public advocate. Jumaane Williams advocates for street dealers on Canal Street. He advocates for street merchandisers on Canal Street, and he doesn't do anything about the public schools. And now let's say that you're a company in Korea, or you're in Switzerland, I'm going to come to New York, and you meet Jumaane Williams. Now, the other guy you could meet, I have a book here. This guy over here is Dan Doctoroff. Dan was the head of the Office of Business Development for the Bloomberg administration. He put in the High Line. He put in the Barclays Center. He put in all these things that were business friendly. And you have a public advocate who's advocating for chaos and street dealers, and you don't have somebody from a business perspective who's saying to the business people, okay, what do you need to come to New York? And you have AOC who's like, don't come to New York. Don't bring us $50 billion. So I think as far as AI goes, the one thing you need to do is get as many jobs as you can, and you just spread them out around the city. So for example, there's going to be a casino at Citi Field. I think that's a great idea. Then the people in Queens can have they can have a job. They don't have to come to Manhattan for that. I think that's a great idea. And then where I think AI is going to have a positive benefit is in the schools, because what's going to happen in the schools eventually is that you're going to have AI learning. So let's say you have 30 kids in a class, and one of them learns this way and one of them learns this way. Well, AI learning allows each kid to learn at the pace that they can manage. And they're supervised by a teacher, just like when you go to the Walgreens and they supervise you checking out. So I think that there's some positives about AI, which is they're going to really be able to tailor learning so we can get at some of our learning issues.
Well, Marty, I think we're running out of time, so I wanted to thank you for being on the mark. And
On the mark.
you've raised a lot of issues and policies that are certainly thought provoking. I wish you luck in your quest to unseat AOC and in your future endeavors. So thank you for being on the mark.
Anybody who wants to help us, it's martydolan.org.
Okay, you got that, martydolan.org. Thank you for being on the mark.
Thanks so much. All right, guys. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Mark. I started this podcast by quoting John F. Kennedy and would like to end it with quoting one of my favorite baseball players, Nolan Ryan. Enjoying success requires the ability to adapt. Only by being open to change will you have a true opportunity to get the most from your talent. I wish you success in staying ahead of the curve instead of behind the 8 ball. Thank you for tuning in.